Chapter 261, The First Conquest, Part 1. General POV. As the sun rises over the mountains and covers the Forgotten Vale in a warm golden sheen, a complete silence envelops the expeditionary camp. Lines upon lines of battle-ready elves and their Dawnguard allies stand in front of the thick walls risen by magic, their shoulders squared and their backs held straight as their leader leisurely walks through the middle of the formation, his hands folded behind his back and his face hidden behind his war crown. A light gale blows through the valley, the dozen triangular banners held by his proudest warriors sent fluttering in its passing as he passes the formation by and stands in front of them, silent, observing. A whole minute passes as he simply stands there, many of the less disciplined soldiers already whispering among themselves as they were summoned and told to gather without any further explanation. That stopped the moment Lord Dagoth summoned his sword and rose it above him, its dark blade somehow glinting in the sunlight. And then he spoke, his calm voice carrying across the whole field with no visible effort. "We came to this place for a sacred purpose." He pauses as his eyes move across the lines, to rid the world of a great threat, and to protect the very sun that blesses us with light and allows us to wield magic. A ball of sunlight forms in his empty hand as he lowers his blade. A vampire lord plots to curse the very land we walk simply because a bit of sunlight bothers him. He thinks that just because he sold his soul to a Daedra like a complete idiot, he now has the right to dictate how the world itself works. The elven lord barks out with disgust. Some of the more experienced elves let out a derisive chuckle at this. But that is enough about a worm we will squash and leave forgotten. He waves his hand to the side as if the topic was a waste of his time. We have found something much greater than mere foes to vanquish, far greater than simple glory. Lord Dagoth proclaims suddenly, "This valley, filled with monsters and the discarded as it is our very future." The rank and file start to shift in surprise, most of them unaware of their lord's further plans. "What I see behind me is not a derelict remnant of our snow-elven brothers and sisters." He continues, "No, what I see behind me is potential." His eyes shift toward a new recruit among his warriors, a father of 4 who could barely feed his children in the Grey Quarter. "What I see is a new home for our people, away from those who would hate us, away from the politics or betrayals of those unworthy to rule us. A place where our children may grow without the hate of the world." His voice softens somewhat as he pauses, letting his words sink in. But only a short inhale later, he speaks once again. "Do not be mistaken, however, in thinking I merely wish to rebuild something once lost." He shakes his head and looks to the solemn-faced Falmer. "Together, both Dunmer and Falmer, and all others who would join us in our glorious work, we shall aim to build something far greater than ever was. We will rise above that which our ancestors created and go beyond mere imitation." A wave of excitement spreads throughout the small army, even if the true weight of their lord's words went over most of their heads. "Should we win and plant our banner atop these mountains, I pledge that all who fought and worked for it shall find a place of honor in the grand sanctum that I will build." He points his blade toward the increasingly excited ranks. "You are, all of you, given the opportunity to carve your names in history as those who took the first steps toward a destiny that we ourselves will one day build. So I ask you all, are you ready to risk your lives for a grander future? Are you ready to bleed so that your children may live in peace? Are you prepared to die for a cause greater than yourselves?" The elven lord turns silent, and silence descends upon the valley once again. A single halberd strikes the ground, and then another, and then a dozen, and then a full 100 weapons start striking the ground in both a salute and cheer, even those not of House Dagoth joining in by banging on their shields, dragged into the mood by the far more numerous elves. Lord Dagoth raises his hand, causing everyone to quieten down, almost as one. "Officers, you already have your orders. Our aim today is to cleanse the entire lower valley and prepare the path for our ascent." He smiles behind his mask. "And for those of you who are still unconvinced by mere words, I will personally reward any who perform beyond expectations so do make sure to give it your all. He allows the greed his words cause to settle in and mix with the already present determination within his men, and just as he feels a sense of anticipation starting to form, he raises his blade once more. My glorious army! The sword bursts into flame. Let the conquest begin. As one, the warriors of House Dagoth start to march in 3 different directions, shaking the very ground with their armored boots, almost all of them ready to give their lives for the cause. Raven's POV. I look around carefully. All right, is everyone gone? A very confused Serana blinks and nods. Should be. Good. I nod, turn to my side, and start retching, Scorch appearing on my shoulder and doing much of the same. A good 10 seconds pass before a very confused Gelabor shifts on his feet uncomfortably. Is he? Just let him get it out of his system. Serana sighs tiredly and palms her face. This is the youngest archmage in multiple eras. Valerica questions, her voice overcome with disbelief. This child? Scorch turns his head around a full 180 degrees and stares her dead in the eyes. Don't knock it till you try it. Less interesting, thirsty Noir. Before turning back toward the ground and continuing to retch. Valerica's eye twitches in irritation, but before she can retort, a hand on her shoulder draws her attention to Nightshade, who was staring at her with dead eyes. You get used to it. Finished with my mental cleansing, I straighten up and turn to the rest with a sunny smile. Never in my life have I spewed such cringe willingly. Scorch shivers, absolutely disgusting. Why would you do it if you are so disgusted? Serana tilts her head. Your soldiers would probably follow your orders, grand speech or no. I cup my goatee thoughtfully and mutter, what did that one Chinese dude say? Before perking up and raising my index finger, ah yes, it went something along the lines of, treat your men as you would your own beloved sons, and they will follow you into the deepest valley. Yeah, that. I nod sagely. Surprisingly, it is Gelabor that speaks, motivating warriors before battle is never wrong, if done properly, of course. Have experience leading Myr into war, Knight Paladin? I ask. By necessity. He nods with a wince. I assure you it was never my choice. I nod understandingly. Gelabor was obviously once a gentle soul, and it no doubt took the start of a genocide to get him to fight in a war. But that was enough of that. We better get moving. Care to tell me which way shrines we can find in the lowest section of the Vale? We have already made our pilgrimage through the Way Shrine of Illumination, of which I am the guardian. The following shall be the Way Shrine of Sight and the Way Shrine of Learning, after which we will have to ascend upon the plateau so that our pilgrimage may take us to the final 2. He explains reverently. Very well then. I start walking. Lead us away and fetch us some holy water. Gelabor clears his throat and points behind him. Lord Dagoth, the Way Shrine is in the other direction. I turn around like nothing happened and continue walking. Of course, I already knew that. I feel the stares on my back before everyone just accepts their fate and begins following me. Orin's POV. Don't let them get close, I shout as I summon a burst of fire from my hands and push back the small group of feral Falmer that managed to sneak below our wall of polearms. More and more bursts of fire follow as the men follow my example and finally manage to break through the wall of pale flesh, guarding the way into their camp. As we start pushing further in, one of the newer recruits overextends, and his less armored thigh is punctured by multiple poisoned arrows. Without hesitating, I grab him by the shoulder and shove him back. The Myr behind us having the good sense to move out of the way so that the Falmer Magi can heal him before he expires. Just as I'm about to thank the good Daedra for a swift victory, one of the feral's chitinous pens bursts open and a small herd of massive Chorus skitter into the battlefield, carelessly stomping over their masters as they hungered for our blood. Shit, ready antidotes and brace for impact, I command, my trained vice carrying and stopping some of the fresher recruits from panicking. As instructed by the tiny lizard mage before the battle even began, I order a slow fighting retreat back into the pass as to funnel the attack into a small area, the trio of Falmer Magi on our side already levitating above our formation and casting debilitating blizzards as to slow them down even further. We hold our ground for what feels like an hour before a nearby ice sheet cracks and a massive wooden club bursts through its walls, letting three horned giants into the clearing. Suddenly sharing my subordinates' nervousness, I prepare to order a full retreat. But then I notice the large orichalcum-clad figure jumping through the opening in the ice, jagged spear already primed for throwing. I do not even manage to blink as the orc throws the weapon with the force of a ballista and disrupts the entire herd of bugs. And as if that was not enough, the icy wall is fully brought down in the next second, letting the rest of the companions in alongside their new gigantic allies. Shaking my astonishment away, I focus back on the battle. My brothers and I have been given great trust, and I was not about to break it due to gawking. I analyze the battlefield and soon find a way to further our advantage. My head snaps toward one of the Falma Magi. Brelar, get the automatons on that rise as quickly as you can. I want full covering fire as we advance. At once, Captain. He salutes and unsheathes a control rod, directing the 24 spider automatons toward their destination. As bolts start falling upon their ranks and reaping their lives by the dozens, I notice the opportunity and raise my weapon high, the enchanted banner sending a wave of confidence through the troops. Onwards, men, for Lord Dagoth. A cheer answers me as we descend upon the Falmer. Author's note: Orin, Marin, and Varin are the three brothers that became Raven's first soldiers. They have been promoted into leadership roles over time and are the current commanders in the army. Chapter 262, The First Conquest, Part 2. Raven's POV, far from the battlefield. Can we not speed this up somehow? I groan, lamenting the fact that real life did not in fact follow game rules. Gelabor, who had been praying the entire way while walking at a slow pace, stops and mutters, "Blessed are you, Auriel, who grants respite to the weary." The slow dribble of sunlight suffusing the ewer stills and settles in the holy water, imbuing it with an otherworldly glow. The elven priest turns to me with a slightly exasperated smile. I apologize, but as the ward is powered by faith, the ceremony must be held in full for us to gain entry into the chantry. I sigh, and can you not just do it on your own while we go and help the troops? I am afraid not. His smile turns wry. If you wish to follow me into the temple, then you must at the very least accompany me on the way. My eye twitches, and there is no way for you to speed it up. Unless you carry Auriel's direct blessing, I am afraid we will have to do this the old-fashioned way. He explains patiently, but I notice the slightest of upturns at the edge of his lips. We will make something out of him yet. Deadpanning at him, I look to the skies and speak, "Oi, big dragon man, help a mer out." An awkward second passes, and I sigh again. No? Yeah, I did not think that would work. Wait a bloody moment. I suddenly still, if it requires Auriel's blessing, then that means that if I had Minthara here, we would just be able to coast through the entire thing. But she is currently stuck in Cyrodiil. Damn me and my scheming ways. I let out a disappointed groan as my shoulders slump. Waving my hand forward, I admit defeat. Fine, just do your thing. I think I just might. Gelabor offers me a sunny, literally smile and resumes his prayer. We, your humble pilgrims, thank you for your divine beneficence. This is going to be a long day. Marin's POV. The troops grow restless as we march through the snowy woodland, both the Dawn Guards accompanying us and my own men, unsettled by the sudden and complete silence that enveloped us. Sir Isran, I look to the frowning leader of the vampire hunters. You sense it too? He asks, his frown deepening. Yes, sir. I nod. This place is perfect for an ambush. He grunts out his agreement. Prepare yourself, but keep it quiet. An ambush is only effective as long as the ambushed are unaware. What incredible wisdom! I roll my eyes, somehow making the Red Guard frown even deeper, even if my face was completely covered up. Word quickly spreads through the ranks, and everyone prepares for battle. Hopefully the ferals won't notice the sudden tension. A tense minute passes before we hear the telltale twang of bows loosing, and I nearly jump as I hear an arrow bounce off the helmet of the mer next to me. But the panic lasts for only a moment as my training kicks in. Ambush, I point at the warriors, defensive positions, and you. I look to the Falmer, get those spheres in front. The black balls of metal roll out in front of the formation, just in time for the ferals to emerge from the forest, numbering well over 100 strong. They fall upon our position like a tidal wave hitting a sheer cliff face as the spheres unravel and start swinging with strength beyond most mortals, cleaving the little goblin beasts in two with each strike. Forward, men, no quarter, I order and join the fight, the Dawn Guard acting as extra shields for when a beast manages to crawl through the lines and us swinging over the automatons, reaping one of them with each swing. Before long the battle ends, only a single vampire hunter having been seriously injured. The man screams out in pain as one of the Falmer attempts to heal the wide gash in his leg, purple poison leaking out just as heavily as blood. The mage's hands start to shake as he mutters, I cannot. Cut off the leg. I decide on the spot, earning a glare from Sir Isran. But the man is a war veteran and controls himself. Why? He grinds out. We cannot save him like this. Cut off the leg and sear the wound. The wounded man whimpers in fear. Lord Dagoth can regrow it when we are done. Isran stares at me for a moment before nodding. Do it. The wounded Dawn Guard tries to protest, but the mage shakily casts some sort of paralysis spell and feeds him some kind of potion, knocking him out. I turn away as he draws his blade. You swear he will be healed? Isran questions. On my honor. I nod and pointedly ignore the regeneration potion hanging off my side. It felt almost as if it was staring at me in judgment, but I wasn't about to waste valuable resources that could save a life later. I also ignored the little voice in the back of my head that praised me for not wasting it on a human. Fine, Isran's voice brings me from my thoughts on to other matters. He forces out, do you not think this was too easy? I look over the battlefield and the realization strikes me, they were expecting reinforcements. And yet there were none. Lord Davos must have dealt with them. I conclude after a moment he was instructed to take out high-value targets and must have found something. And as if summoned, a crow familiar lands on my shoulder, a folded parchment in its mouth. I give it a quick read and nod. It would seem I was right. We can keep moving. Before the Red Guard can question me further, I raise my weapon, forward march. Davos's POV. I lazily kick at the body of a dead Falmer shaman, the entire hilltop around me covered in corpses that were more crossbow bolt than flesh. That all of them? I ask. Just a moment, Hound calls out and shoves his dagger into the throat of a still wiggling Falmer. Yep, that should be all of them. Good. I write the report down and summon my familiar, let us get going. I don't want to find out what Boss would do if he learned a third of his army was almost killed by an avalanche. A couple of the guildsmen shivered at the thought before stepping in behind me. No one wanted to be at the other end of that particular beatdown. Raven's POV. Welcome initiate to the shrine of blah 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 blah, Oriel, blah blah blah, praise the sun, blah blah blah. My eyes were completely dead as I leaned on my glaive and observed Gelibor offer yet another overly long prayer before the second way shrine. I honestly felt like I was sighting in on a math lecture, and this time I couldn't just sleep through it. Oh no, this young supplicant must remain awake to be graced with the sun's eternal wisdom. Fucking hate this ostentatious crap. Silver lining pops, at least you don't have to do the prayer yourself. Scorch chirps, obviously trying to fuck with me. If I had to do that, then I would let Harkon win out of sheer spite, I mutter to myself. You say something? Serana asks from beside me. Nothing, I wave her off, just grumbling about hours of religious drivel. I personally find it fascinating. Valerica pipes in. Listening to the prayers of a dead culture is one of the rare things that can truly interest me. So you are telling me that the vampire lady is interested in prayers to the sun? I ask with a quirked eyebrow. Her lips become a thin line as her eyes narrow. You know that is not what I said, you insufferable child. Oh, come now, you know you low irk. I whine as I feel an elbow smash into my stomach. The perpetrator of the treasonous act, being one very pissed-off nightshade, giving me the can you not right now look. Fine, fine. I raise my hands in mock surrender. I will be good. She shares a look with Valerica, and it was at that moment that a grand alliance was made. The Falmer huffs and turns back to Gelibor, who was still deep in prayer. I look at the slowly setting sun with a forlorn expression. Yup, a really long fucking day. Varen's POV. Everything was prepared. The enemy was surrounded in their camps and completely unaware of our presence. Our target camp was the largest of all, and the cave entrance it guarded was the most important one, as it led into another section of the magical cave through which we entered the valley. I raised my hand, ready to signal the attack, but then the scholar Alor grabbed me by the shoulder and pointed toward the center of the camp. I could not make out what he was trying to tell me at first, but then I noticed a garish blue robe covered in starts, and then the figure it was attached to. "What is he doing?" I hiss, fearing for the eccentric Argonian's life. Alor simply shrugged his shoulders, obviously having no idea about it himself. I can only pray that he will survive, as he was a great mage. I could not let this opportunity to strike go, but once again Alor shook me out of my determination. "What?" I hiss, this time with far more annoyance in my voice. "Look!" The Falmer mage points, and what I saw made me think I was drunk. Lord Shalazar was standing on the head of one of the panicking feral shamans, his hands moving daintily as if he was moving a puppet, and the entire camp was in chaos. Falmer were stabbing each other, some of them even biting into their brethren, all the while the tiny wizard cackled like a complete madman, his squeaky voice making the whole situation that much more terrifying. One of my officers speaks, "I thought we had a plan. Wasn't he supposed to just counter the mages?" There is genuine terror in his voice as his eyes shift from the Argonian and then back to me. "Oh?" I give him a deadpan look, "And are you going to be the one to tell the suspected archmage what he can and can't do?" The Mer looks at me as if to say, "Are you fucking kidding me?" and shakes his head vigorously. Slowly, I stand up from my position, the feral sentries long since dead by their own hands, and grumble, "Let's just clean everything up." I was glad that no more of my subordinates would die today, but I would be lying if I didn't admit that fighting to the death would have made me feel better than this. Raven's POV. "Thank you for your report. I tell the three brothers, you are dismissed for the night." My lord," Maren speaks up. "Yes, Captain?" I tilt my head. "I promised the Dawn Guards you would heal one of his men. We had to amputate his leg, see, and—" My deadpan stare made him so uncomfortable he started to actually fidget. With a lazy flick of my hand, I summon a potion and toss it at him, his hands moving to catch it without any thought as he stared at me like I just killed his dog. "Just feed him that. That is what the potions are for." He stares at me for a moment longer, offers a stiff bow and walks out of the tent. "Wonder who shat in his breakfast," I mutter. The thought only remains for a moment longer as my mind returns to the report. 16 dead, including a Falmer that got an unlucky arrow through the eye once his magicka ran out and he couldn't keep his wind cloak going. It was expected that I would lose people in this expedition, but the numbers were still uncomfortable to look at. They were my people, looking up to me to keep them safe and alive, and now 16 were dead. I knew that this was unavoidable. They had to get blooded at some point, or they would otherwise remain just fancy adornments decorating my halls. But that did not make me any more comfortable with the fact. And so, like any responsible adult, I decided to find something else to occupy my mind as I walked up a nearby hill, free of any sentry or guard. The shadows moved as I approached, a barely visible form coiling around itself and allowing twin massive golden embers to greet me as a deep voice rumbled, "Finally ready for your meditations, Thuri." Chapter 263, The Water Twins. Time seemed to fly as I sat cross-legged atop that small hill, Krine's deep voice whispering sage advice about using the voice as he observed me with knowing eyes. He obviously taught before and seemed to enjoy it, as he explained concepts that I had a hard time grasping, like they were the most obvious thing in the world. The thing I asked him to teach me was a deeply terrible one, especially for someone with my experiences. I sought his insight into souls and how to turn said knowledge into a devastating attack. At first he was taken aback, mostly due to his understanding that mortals found souls to be sacred and not because of his own beliefs. And he was right. The soul was a deeply sacred thing, but some things were just too difficult to kill, and I knew that having what amounted to a power word kill would come in handy at one point or another. Better to have a power and never use it than not have it when you truly need it, is how I justified myself to him. And myself. Most of the night was spent theorizing on the best combination of words before we settled on it, and he spent the remaining time giving me what he called an introduction to the concept of essence, but felt like it was a masterclass lesson in animancy, the depth and breadth of which ended up with me falling asleep without even realizing it. And then I woke up refreshed and feeling more energized than ever, with a bunch of tall grass surrounding me in a neat circle, and the dragon nowhere to be found. I did not need to worry, though, as I sensed him resting atop one of the mountain peaks to the south. My return to camp went through without any fanfare, with everyone long since used to the concept of mages doing whatever the fuck they wanted. No one batted an eye at my disappearance. As everyone else woke up to greet the dawn, I made the rounds across the small settlement and was pleasantly surprised to find that morale was at an all-time high. Maybe my standards were too big, but I fully expected at least some of the Dunmer to be shaken with the death of a good 15% of the force. Then again, this was motherfucking Skyrim, and those were some pretty damn good numbers for a land where you were expected to die if you ever stepped out of a city without guards or martial training. In fact, a good number of the Dunmer were outright hopeful. Many of them, having family in the Grey Quarter, saw this as a golden opportunity to move them away from the Nord's hatred and into a far safer place. Some of the bolder twats in the ranks even started whispering about me being a living saint of the displaced. I would be bothered about it, but honestly, it was going to happen at some point, and wasting energy on people being a tad overly thankful for the guidance I offered was just going to be hypocritical. If they felt themselves lowly enough to rise me above a mere mortal, then good on them. I gave no fucks either way. The people whose opinion I cared about had enough of a brain to not fall into that particular rabbit hole anyway. Still, there was work to be done, and sitting on my arse pondering on it would solve no problems, so after checking in with the quartermasters and making sure our plan of attack was still on track, I sent the men on their way and fetched Gelabor for yet another long walk, filled with prayer. I could not wait to be done with this shit. My creative bits were getting antsy, and building this place up into a magical wonderland could not come too soon. General POV, half a day later. The 4 circle companions slowly marched across a frozen field, the blood covering their weapons and armor not seeming to bother them in the slightest, as Vilkas tapped Durek's shoulder. The orc grunted as he chewed on some jerky. What is next on the list after the shaman camp? The smarter twin asked. The orc quickly swallowed his food and unrolled a small parchment, his eyes narrowing at the tiny writing. Next up is, meet up with the Maren's unit and join in a pincer attack. Should be the last big camp as well, so we can finally get around to attacking the main base. Before anyone could respond, Durek frowned. Fucking hell, there is a tiny addendum here, but I can't read it for the life of me. Damn spies. Vilkas grunts and proffers his hand. Give it here. Taking the parchment from the shrugging orc, he stared at it with the focus of a warrior and read aloud, "Be warned. Boss said not to step onto the frozen lake. If you do, you are fucked." Wonder what he meant by that. Farkas hums as they continue walking without a care, only to find that Ayla has completely stopped moving. They all turned to the huntress and saw her pointing below them, their eyes slowly moving down to find themselves standing atop a very large, very frozen lake. Vilkas palmed his face. She. And that is as far as he got as the entire lake shook, the companions scrambling to get off it as fast as they could. They got about half the way there before the ice cracked, thankfully not right below them, even if they might have preferred it to what happened next. 2 blurs of reddish bronze flew out of the lake, draconic roars shaking the air as they announced their return. The human companions were struck with fear. For all their years of adventuring, none of them had ever faced a foe like this. Vilkas was already planning to call for a swift retreat, but before he could do that, he saw the shaking form of his orcish brother. At first, it seemed the Orsimer was shaking in fear, but soon a deep, hungry laugh erupted from his throat as he slammed his spear into the ice below him and shouted in jubilation, "Now that is what I am talking about." Even as the dragons turned to them and prepared to dive in and play with their prey, the human companions still had the energy to facepalm. Raven's POV. As Gelibor finally finished his prayer, a slight premonition touched upon my senses. My eyes closed for but a moment. In the next instant, I was standing atop Scorch and flying toward the north of the Vale at full speed. General POV. As the dragons descended, the companions did not remain still. The twins were already winding up their attacks, while Isla had already loosed a dozen enchanted arrows, most of which were dodged or batted away, save for one striking between the scales of one of them and causing him to move out of the way. The other one found himself a far less fortunate target as he dove for the massive morsel of a orc that would no doubt keep him nice and fed for a couple of days. He was rewarded by said orc winding his hand back and tossing a spear straight into his wing join, causing him to scream out in pain and fall to the ground. This was not enough to even faze the grounded twin as he stomped the ice, flipping himself up and immediately yanking the spear that was draining his life force out of the wound. Durek was not standing still during this, as he drew his twin scimitars and jumped at the distracted dragon, aiming to cut out his left eye with a double overhead swing. Far faster than he could react, the dragon whirled on him, his claws flashing with such force that if Durek was not currently carrying a Daedric blessing and wearing enchanted armor, he would have been turned into red mist. It was still enough to break several bones and catapult him away, and straight into the word wall at the lake's center. The orc was left barely coherent enough to chug down a potion as he watched his shield brothers slash at the dragon and show it the might of their Skyforge blades. They only got a few swings in before the other twin rounded on them and forced them to run with a wide frost breath. The sudden twist of the dragon's flight drew Ayla's attention as she once more loosed arrow after arrow at it. Her single-minded focus on bringing the beast down nearly cost her her life, as the grounded twin shouted a whirlwind sprint and appeared in front of her, his jaws open and ready to devour her. And she would have been devoured. The dragon was moving so fast, her trained eyes could just barely register the movement, if not for suddenly finding herself standing somewhere else. The huntress blinked in surprise and looked around, only to jump in fright and definitely let out a girlish yelp as lightning exploded from below her and struck both the dragons, sending them flinching back and glaring at their new opponent. For a brief moment, Ayla felt like kicking the damned lizard that was laughing his arse off at her reddened face, but she damn well knew better. To her surprise, the dragons stopped moving around as Shalazar approached the lake with leisurely steps, the might of his magic so potent that even the spirits of time had to put some respect on him. "Well now, what do we have here?" Shalazar squeaked, his eternally cute voice somehow carrying the note of pure derision. "A pair of cowards hiding in the ice, popping their heads out when they are not invited." The dragon to the left let out an amused snort, or at least the closest thing to it he could. "The mortals served well to amuse us after our awakening. We did not expect someone of worth to appear." "Oh, you find me worthy, do you?" Shalazar squeaks. "How will my poor little lizard heart ever survive such an honor?" He bit out sarcastically. The one to the right narrowed his ridged brows. "You speak arrogantly for one so small. And I have held better conversation with mice. The Argonian snips, yet here I am, talking with lesser beasts." "You will pay for that insolence," the same dragon growled. The tiny Argonian took what looked like the comic version of a martial pose and made a bring-it motion with his hand. "Come on and make me, bitch." Just as quickly as before, both dragons invoked the whirlwind sprint and went in for the kill. Unlike before, though, they found the Argonian dancing around them with insulting ease, as for each shout they pointlessly sent his way, he responded with a painful flash of magic. The companions joined in mere moments later. Finally having shaken off the Shalazar effect, they tried to do as much damage as they could. The dragons outright ignored them, outside of shouting a shield into existence when a particularly nasty wound was about to be made. At first, it seemed that Shalazar would just annoy the massive beasts to death, but for all his might, a master of destruction he was not, and soon he found himself giving his all to evade the now far less rusty dragons, barely giving him any time to damage them in any way. After one particularly explosive contest of magic and voice, the two sides found themselves distanced from one another, the companions panting tiredly with Durek still nowhere to be found, and the lizard wizard chugging down a magica potion with an annoying slurping noise. "You annoy us, lizard," The right twin growled, "Fight us or flee, you cannot do both." Shalazar cleaned his mouth with his robe and let out a satisfied sigh. "Oh, I very much assure you that I can." The left dragon turned to his comrade. "Brother, this is getting irritating. Enough playing around." The right one let out a huff of hot air. "Fine," and turned to his targets. "Pitiful creatures, you have earned our ire. Know that you fay." A few things happened in that instant. Shalazar smirked. A slumped orc grinned like a madman as his wounds finally healed. And both the twin dragons shoved each other out of the way with full force as two blurs, one black and one gold, passed through their previous position. Raven completely missed his target, as for all his clairvoyance, he could not move quickly enough to do any more than merely clip the dragon's scales. Crine, on the other hand, missed his attempt to bite down on the other dragon's jaw, but still managed to slam his claws into his face and send him sprawling. The entire battlefield stilled as the new combatants joined the fight. The downed dragon clutched his face and glared at his enemy. "You!" A rumbling chuckle left the pitch-black dragon's throat as he stared down at the twins with amusement. "So this is where you cowards were hiding for all this time. It will be a pleasure to show you just how pathetic you are once again, Voslarum and Naslarum." Even as they failed to recognize the dragon that spoke to them with such derision, both the twins still felt a familiar shiver go down their spines as the black dragon smirked down at them. Then their eyes moved to the other attacker and found a Dunmer standing atop a golden flaming bird and holding a very dangerous-looking blade. Voslarum and Naslarum shared one quick look, nodded, and bolted the fuck out of there. Voslarum, Clawwater Twin, Naslarum, Toothwater Twin. Chapter 264, Approaching the Summit. Raven's POV. A deathly silence descended upon the now unfrozen lake. The sheer bafflement of everyone present was palpable. Well, that and the amusement of the two lizards still present. Did they just... I trail off, unable to actually comprehend a pair of dragons outright fleeing. Yup, they did. Scorch sighs. I too let out a defeated exhale, and we made such a perfect entrance too. A deep rumbling chuckle leaves Crine's throat, completely startling the companions in the process. The twins were always skittish, and then as if remembering an inside joke, he laughs even louder. What? What the fuck? Vilkas and Farkas shriek in perfect sync. Oh yeah, I have Scorch do a perfect 180 while still standing atop him. Companions, meet Crine, Crine the companions. A pleasure? Vilkas asks more than states. Farkas, to the surprise of many, smacks his brother. Definitely a pleasure. Crine hums. To think that Skyrim's greatest warriors have fallen so low. Before Ayla can have an explosive outburst at the dragon's comment, our attention is drawn by the sound of heavy boots landing on ice, and we all turn to see Durek hobble his way toward us. He stops, looks at Crine, then at me, shakes his head and keeps walking. I am not even going to ask. Probably wise, little one. Crine grins a terrifying grin. As I absent-mindedly start healing the now relaxed Durek, I turn to Shalazar. Think you can locate the fuckers, master? Oh, I can do better than merely locate them. The lizard wizard grins and rubs his hand, imitating my tendency to do the same. You might even say I have come up with a cunning plan. General POV. As evening encroaches upon the hidden valley, two massive bronze forms darken what little light was still there. The twin dragons, yet unwilling to fully flee, as their pride demanded them to strike back. Voslarum looks to his brother. Do you sense them too? I do, brother. Naslarum growls, weakling servants of the bastard that humiliated us. Shall we show him the error of his ways? Voslarum grins and immediately starts diving for the convoy of soldiers. Naslarum, being the more patient one, continues flying for a brief moment, long enough to realize that something was amiss. The trees held far more life than they usually would, and the snow around the marching elves was too uneven, even for a forest. "Brother, wait!" Naslarum called out. But it was in vain. Ever the eager one, Voslarum dived straight for the column, already breathing in preparation for a devastating fire breath, his eyes glinting with pure malice. And that was exactly when the trap was sprung. as the elven warriors dispersed as one and the snow burst upwards, revealing a dozen automaton ballistae aiming straight for the dragon. Voslaram's eyes widened as he attempted to dive to the side, but the cold machines cared little for his struggles as they let loose their enchanted bolts, which slammed into him faster than he could blink. The whirlwind sprint, which was at the tip of his tongue, fizzled out due to the pain, and his aggressive dive became a free fall toward the ground. Naslarum could only watch as his brother fell, and the very ground struck out to meet him as pillars of compacted earth were torn upwards in the shape of jagged spikes. Realizing that things were getting far too dangerous, the patient twin lost his patience and dove for his brother, his form blurring as he invoked the whirlwind. He cared little for his own safety as he dove downwards, the image of his brother's wings tearing up as he was impaled first by the ground and then by the many warriors rushing from the forest, turning his sight red and clouding his mind. And then he heard them, the words which struck terror into the hearts of all Dovar. "Your Zarfrul!" The shout connected almost immediately, and Naslarum felt half dead already as his wings failed him, his body creating a long crater as he helplessly slammed into the ground and groaned in pain as even trees were enough to damage him in this state. To his surprise, no mortal awaited below, leaving him completely alone with nothing to mend his ire as he waited for the curse of mortality to wear off. By the time he managed to start hobbling out of the forest and into the clearing, his mind had been cleared from the wrathful fog which clouded it and was replaced with terrified worry, an emotion that injected his heart with a second wind as he rushed toward his brother. Naslarum barreled out of the woods just in time to see the leader of the elves, the same damned creature that cursed him, approach the mangled and barely conscious Voslarum with his blade. "Damned mortals, wait!" The panicked dragon called out, "Stop!" The elf cared not for his cries as he raised his flaming blade for a slash. Naslarum bit down on his pride and cried, "Spare him, and we will serve." The elf stopped for a moment, giving the dragon hope that he may be able to reach him and rip him to shreds before his brother expired, and then he swung his blade down without a care, splitting Voslarum's skull open and killing him on the spot. Raven looked at the stunned twin and smirked. "What use have I for cowards?" Naslarum's entire being demanded that he butcher the elf for his crimes, his very soul seethed in rage at the insolent little mortal. But he knew it was a battle he could not win, so he turned around hoping to heal and fight another day. And then his eyes met those of burning gold. The last twin only had the time to gulp before Krine's claws descended upon his throat and killed him on the spot. The field turned completely silent. And then the troops burst into a cacophony of cheers and declarations, their leaders' plan to eternally cement their loyalty well on its way to completion. Raven's POV the following day. Things turned pretty wild by the time we returned to camp, as some fucking how, even in this backwater, the rumor mill was still going full force. So instead being welcomed back with an attentive garrison force, we were met with a pre-prepared feast, which stretched well into the night. I was going to stop it seeing as we were in the middle of a military campaign, but Shalazar said it was okay, and I wasn't about to question the Great One. And so by the time morning came and we marched out in full force toward our final target, the spirits of the men was incredibly high. Even the loss of an additional 8 of their number did nothing to deter their enthusiasm to finally conquer this place. Their resolve held even as we approached the narrow canyon, filled to the brim with furious feral Falmer, all of whom were glaring at us even through their disgusting little scabs. A massive barricade of wood and chitin stood in front of the rudimentary city, hundreds of archers at the ready to loose their poisoned arrows at us. The ferals expected to hold a last stand, a glorious rallying cry that even their little minds would understand and would allow them to rally the disparate tribes lost in the cut-off caves. But we were not here to play fair. My army, under the supreme command of Davos and with the military advice of Isran, stood before the city just outside of arrow and spell range and simply waited. The wind blew violently against my face as the veritable fortress became bigger and bigger in my sight allowing me to easily notice the thousands of little Falmer within. For a moment I appreciated the sheer ingenuity of their strategy, as each and every passage was filled to the brim with ambush spots and kill zones for their archers, the entire battlefield obviously designed for a defense in depth. Whoever was leading them was not stupid or naive. I spent a moment longer appreciating the work of art in front of me, and then I spoke. What a fine welcoming committee, wouldn't you say? I feel so respected, Crine drawls from below me. Well, best not keep them waiting. I smirk and breathe in, my dragon following in perfect sync. The air seemed to still, and I noticed many of the Falmer still with it, their instincts warning them about what was to come. We let the tension grow for a moment longer. And then we spoke, Fooz ro da. Before the shout hit its target, I whispered Teed, and time slowed, giving me a glorious view of the forceful impact. I watched with perfect clarity as the combined unrelenting force of both tongue and dragon struck the wall, shattered it into barely more than dust, and launched the debris deeper into the city, showering the entire settlement in improvised shrapnel and ruining most defenses behind it. Following this signal, my own army charged into the city, automatons first of course, and started butchering everything that still had the fucking audacity to remain standing. For hours they ascended into the canyon, the companions leading seemingly suicidal charges and coming out on top more than once, the Dawn Guards hunting down the seemingly exclusively vampiric shamans, and Shalazar causing chaos wherever the concentration of enemies seemed to be getting a bit too problematic. Resources were thrown without a care, as I declared nothing was to be held back in this battle, easily throwing thousands upon thousands of septims worth of equipment and potions down the drain in an attempt to create a genuinely elite force. Whoever was leading the defense seemed to realize just how outmatched they were, and so they called up all of their remaining forces to retreat to the peak of the canyon just before the final way shrine, in fact. The large Falmer, evidently a vampire by his jagged fangs, barked out orders for his minions to follow, having them form up at the best possible choke points which would allow his depleting force of bowmen to rain havoc at my men. It was a valiant effort, I admit. I genuinely respected the little bloodsucker for doing his absolute best to slow us down and kill as many of my people as possible. But respect did not equate to mercy, and so as my people approached the final kill zone, Crine and I descended once again. The Falmer commander had only a single moment to widen his uncovered crimson eyes before he and most of his force were engulfed in a breath of dragon fire. Damn, I almost pitied the fuckers. Once again my forces stood gathered, even if this time they were merely to observe. The daughters of Cold Harbor, Nightshade and I stood behind Gelibor as he finished his final prayer and filled the sacred ewer with the final waters of the way shrine, the water within looking more akin to liquid sunlight as the ritual was complete. Solemnly, the Knight Paladin led us toward the dilapidated bridge of the Chantry of Auriel, its ancient marble walls still carrying an air of sanctity even after Vyrthur's defilement. The ancient elf poured the golden waters into the sunburst-shaped basin, and as they touched the engraved gates, the way was opened. The stomping salutes of the army followed our every step as we ascended into the temple. Vyrthur's days were numbered, and Serana would finally gain closure for her torment. A good day indeed. Chapter 265, Blasphemer vs. Arch-curate. The moment we passed the threshold of the temple gates, they shut behind us, locking up once again. Immediately Valerica rounded at Gelibor, eyes narrowed in accusation. What is the meaning of this? The Knight Paladin winced at the violent echo of her voice, but composed himself just as quickly. Please pardon this deception. He bows his head with genuine remorse. I had to make sure Vyrthur's evil would not triumph even should we fall. My companions turned silent at that, Serana and Nightshade giving him nods of understanding, while Valerica was no doubt coming up with myriad ways she was going to make his life hell when we claimed our prize. I, on the other hand, felt nothing but annoyance. You could have just told us this would have happened, and we would have continued anyway. But since you thought you could deceive us like this, know that when we win, I am going to beat the ever-loving shit out of you. My words passed him by like a light breeze as he smiled, a sacrifice I am more than willing to pay. Ugh, I roll my eyes, fucking zealots, I swear. We proceeded deeper into the temple, the elder vampire grumbling the entire way, and soon emerged into a vast chamber. It was a square room, made almost entirely of white marble. Its ceiling was made up of many arches which spread from the center and into the differing wings of the building. The whole place gave me the feeling of standing in a magical cathedral, which, to be entirely fair, was exactly what this place was. But what drew most of our eyes, completely ruining the ethereal beauty of the chantry in the process, were the numerous frozen figures standing in every single corner of the room. Most were made up of the feral farmer and their pet beasts, but some stood far taller, easily marking themselves as the ancient paladins of the chantry, all four of them standing proudly in their glorious death, unmarked by Vyrthur's later betrayal. Wait a bloody moment. I narrowed my eyes and immediately cast a wide-range scan, followed by a clairvoyance, just in case. Why are they alive? This threw my companions for a loop, but it was Gelibor who was most shaken by my declaration, as he outright gasped, "You are certain?" It is pretty dim, but I can sense a bit of life force still left in them. I cup my chin and tap my foot in thought. They will require immediate care once extracted, followed by months of therapy, or they will expire within minutes of their liberation. Gelibor stares at his frozen comrades with longing, and then his gaze hardens. Even so, they will be happy to do their due. No. Surprisingly, it wasn't me who immediately called him out on his bullshit. You will stop your pathetic posturing and accept that there are greater things and goals than your forgotten faith. Nightshade bites out. No more people are going to be sacrificed in your and your brother's self-righteous crusade against each other. So shut up and make sure to go in front of us. Since you think you can sacrifice others so easily, you won't mind being used as a meat shield as well. A silence descends upon the chamber for a brief moment before Scorch appears on my shoulder and somehow lets out a whistle. "You tell him, girl," said Falmer lowers her head in embarrassment and looks away, just now realizing that she had an outburst in front of her lord. Instead of teasing her further, I look to Gelibor and make a shushing motion toward the next passage. "Go on then. You heard the scary little lady." We passed the following rooms without further incident. Many of the frozen statues were holding something valuable, almost beckoning us to take it. But I knew better and wasn't quite so much of a kleptomaniac as to immediately loot it. So we went completely undisturbed, even if Scorch called me a scrub in private. Finally, we stepped out into what seemed to be a frozen-over prayer space turned throne room, the powerful presence of the Arch-curate's languid form immediately drawing all of our eyes. And I swear to all the gods, if I didn't already have a reason to kill his ass, I would have no doubt wanted to murder him for his voice alone. "Brother," he greeted with false cheer, his vocal cords straining under the effort, making his voice sound almost as bad as someone bringing their nails upon a chalkboard. "Vyrthur," Gelibor spat, "your blasphemy ends today." The vampire rolls his eyes, still unmoving from his throne. "Oh, save me your preaching. It made you sound the fool thousands of years ago, and it makes you sound like one now." "You think this is a joke?" Gelibor hisses with yet unseen heat. "Well, you are here." The Arch-curate points his open hand at him like it explained everything. I couldn't help it. I actually burst out laughing at that. "Oh, that is a good one." I chortle and slap my thigh. "Made my bloody day." "At least someone can appreciate a good bout of wit." The vampire huffs. "One should indeed engage in minor bouts of tomfoolery from time to time." I nod, sagely, immediately joined by Scorch, who did the same. It keeps life interesting. "Yes." Vyrthur trails off, confused by how relaxed I was. "Why are you here?" he asks me. "Why, to kill you, of course." I say, as if describing the weather. "Doesn't mean I have to be a cunt about it, though." His eyes narrow and then land on the daughters of Coldharbour. Finally. He mutters and looks back to me. "I might even spare you after this, even if I did make you come all the way here and bring your two companions." Valerica looks just about ready to explode, but I whisper to her, "Shh, he is about to monologue." "What do you mean by that?" Serana asks the vampiric Falmer with narrowed eyes. "It was I who created the prophecy of the sun's tyranny all those eras ago," Vyrthur proclaims proudly, slowly standing from his throne. "I have moved the world itself so that I may punish Auriel for his betrayal, and you, my dear pawns, have boldly walked to your deaths, just as I predicted. I do wonder, what did you sacrifice for playing with 3 entire scrolls?" I cut in before Serana can respond. He gives me a dismissive glance. No sacrifice was too great. I give a quick glance to Gelibor at that, who after immediately catching my meaning, looks away in shame. Composing herself after my interruption, Serana shrieks, "So everything that has happened to us has been part of some inane plan of yours?" "Yes." Vyrthur's smile is all teeth. Serana turns completely silent at that, sharing a determined nod with her mother. I could physically feel their power start moving as they prepared to butcher the poor fucker. But seeing as I've invoked tomfoolery earlier, it was time to evoke it. "You know, Virtua, I am something of a prophet myself," I say as I twirl my newly summoned blade lazily. "Get to the point, meat," he snaps. "For all that ice you surround yourself with, you aren't all that chill." I deadpan, and before he can make me cease with my bullshit, I stop twirling the sword and show it to him. This is blasphemy, a rather potent little blade with one very neat power. "I trust you are going somewhere with this?" Vyrthur drawls. "It isn't like you can escape this place thanks to my dear brother." Cute. I snort at the implication that something as pathetic as a divine barrier can hold me and continue speaking. "You see, Vyrthur, I know why you decided to do what you did," I say with a smile as I notice the vampire stiffening. "You fought with all your might, giving your all in battle for Auriel, only for one of the attackers to infect you with their curse." "What, are you trying to beg for mercy now?" the vampire growls. "But then the infection finally settled." I continue, ignoring his outburst. "And you found yourself cut off from Auriel's blessing, forever barred from the sun, and betrayed by the one you dedicated yourself to. I could help you gain what you have lost." "What?" The Arch-curate breaks a part of his throne in surprise, my companions sharing a good part of said surprise as they gave me different looks, some merely interested and others narrowed at my perceived betrayal. "For you see, Vyrthur," I still go on like nothing happened, "this blade of mine can cut any bond I desire it to." I start to twirl it again. "You were not abandoned by Auriel, Vyrthur," I say with all the gravitas of death itself. "You were cursed by Molag Bal, and that curse made you no less a puppet than the daughters of Coldharbour you sought to control." "No," the panicked vampire barks, "you lie. And why would I do that, Vyrthur?" I tilt my head. "As I've said, I could free you of that curse, let you see the dawn once more." I pause for dramatics, letting the tiniest bit of hope appear in the vampire's eyes. "But I am not going to do that," I declare with a wicked smile. Somehow I think that the half-frozen ancient undead felt a chill in his heart at that. "For you see, Vyrthur," I say, his name now tinged with the vitriol it deserves, "you did not merely seek to fight your perceived betrayal on your own, or even assault the temples of the one you thought your enemy." I shake my head. "No, you made it the entire world's problem." I point my blade at his shivering form, a solar gold sheen surrounding both me and my weapon. "Your little tantrum has led to the entirety of the world falling under risk. You sought to spite Auriel, no matter the cost, and due to your actions, thousands, if not more, have died." The golden sheen becomes brighter. "You are unworthy of mercy." I growl, "Unworthy of redemption." The sheen turns to flame, "Unworthy of salvation." And with that, the spell finishes forming, and a gigantic blast of sunfire sears toward the completely stunned vampire, blasting him through the already weakened walls and onto the balcony behind him. Slowly, I breathe out and sheathe my blade before turning to the vampires. "Ladies, I trust you wish to extract your own pound of flesh now." Serana looks reluctant, a tiny part of her sympathizing with the childish fuck laying half-burnt in one of the corners of the balcony, but her mother knows better and places a hand on her shoulder. "Come, dear. Let us make that filthy creature be useful for once in its miserable existence." Things turn silent for a brief moment before the Falmer and I hear Vyrthur's pained screams, and then silence once more. Gelibor stares at me with wide eyes. "Just like that," he mutters. I crushed his spirit. I shrug and start walking toward the balcony. All that was left was his body. "Good riddance." Nightshade spits in disgust at one of her potential ancestors. Gelibor is still for a brief moment longer, but catches up quickly after that. We pass by the vampires, both of them looking out onto the valley, with Valerica consoling a rather put-off Serana. I would join them later, but we still had a job to do. Without prompting, Gelibor begins his prayer, and only a minute later, the central platform on the balcony raises up, revealing another way shrine and a beautiful gold and silver bow floating atop its center. Lacking any hesitation, I grab the weapon and step back. The moment its grip touches my hand, I feel a delightful warmth go through my entire body, making me feel as if a warm blanket had covered my very soul. I open my eyes to find myself surrounded by a beam of golden light. Gelibor bowed before me in prayer, while Valerica ran back into the temple, a bit of her skin looking a tad charred. Serana was thankfully unaffected, and Nightshade looked completely and utterly unsurprised by the event. With a mental flick, I check on what just happened and fail to contain a smile. Blessing of Akatosh, Auriel, the chief divine of both elven and human pantheons, has granted you his favor. Your affinity toward the sun is increased even further, and you gain an affinity toward time and a resistance towards temporal effects. Auriel's bow. The sun shall burn away the wicked. All arrows loosed from this bow deal massively increased damage against any creature which might be considered dark or wicked. The effect is further increased if the arrows are properly sun-hallowed. It is an honor to be in the presence of one so blessed. The reverent tone of Gelibor brings me from my musing, his head still bowed low, even as his prayer was complete. Apparently, the big dragon upstairs agrees with my words. I huff. As crude as your speech might have been, your words carried naught but righteousness. The ancient paladin bows even deeper. I trust that you will hold no further compunctions about my rule of this valley, I ask needlessly. Of course not, Herald. He salutes me. Me, and should you choose to heal them, my brothers will be honored to serve Auriel through one of his blessed people. I nod at that, satisfied at having secured the loyalty of yet another group. Things were going to turn hectic once again after this. Keeping track of an entire territory was no doubt going to be a massive chore, and I had to make sure the vampires were all right just in case. But there was still yet one thing left to do before we took our leave. Faster than he could blink, or otherwise react, Gelibor found himself flying through the air, my armored gauntlet leaving a bloody print on his face. Chapter 266, Valley Finale. Things turned incredibly hectic the moment I finished beating the shit out of Gelibor and left his unconscious body to feast upon the sunlight he so adores. For as much as I wanted to give everyone a day off, the cave-ins we caused would not keep the feral farmer out forever, and making sure our position was defensible was a must. And so everyone immediately got to work fortifying the top of the hill the chantry stood on, and as usual the place was already well protected by sturdy walls, the most important of which I enchanted personally, just as a fuck you to any shaman who thought they could blow them up. The way shrine in front of the temple was marked with a large circle imbued with molten silver, and Shalazar had already teleported back to Winterhold and was likely already building another one with the help of the other Archmagi. I also gave him a signed letter for Karsus to prepare all manner of supplies and even some reinforcements, even my own personal stock of automatons. If this was to be our home, we would do our damnedest to ensure no one would ever be able to take it from us. On a far more interesting note, once Gelibor finally got his arse up and wordlessly healed himself, we went ahead and unfroze his fellow paladins. Instead of letting them question everything, we simply knocked them out, and I proceeded to heal them as much as I could. For all my skill, I was not yet quite so proficient as to fully repair malnourishment and the like. They did wake up relatively quickly though, likely owing to the minor blessings I could sense on them, and proceeded to question Gelibor about everything that happened. Needless to say, by the time he finished, they all swore eternal allegiance to me as the herald of Auriel. I may as well be their bloody messiah, and they love me for it. Which led to another interesting development. Trait gained, Greater Falmer Paragon. It changed nothing for those who were already in my service, but after one quick trip to a lesser camp, I discovered that even the feral ones felt reluctant to fight me personally. Definitely something I could use when I decided to pick up my rejuvenation treatment plans. Durok's tribe of giants accepted being settled in one of the more remote areas of the valley. They were not quite stupid. I'd hesitate to call them any kind of intelligent, but they were very simple folk when it came down to it. They wanted to raise their cow herds in peace, and if they could get us to promise to not bother them, they were more than content to return the favor and even trade after a point. This was but the first step in bringing them under my service, but no one needed to know that for now. Isran and the Dawn Guard were outright giddy when I showed them the bow, and Dexion radiated the feeling of righteous fulfillment as he learned that his sacrifice and cause were not in vain. The man looked so content with his deeds, I could have killed him then and there, and he would not have given a singular shit. Not that I would ever do that, but the point stood. Righteously justified religious zealots aside, Isran made sure to ask that I let him leave as soon as the portal was ready, so that he could gather all his people and some hidden allies. It was just a bunch of mercenaries, I already knew, in preparation for the assault on Volkihar Castle. I had no doubt Harkon, or someone within his court, already knew something was coming up, and they were preparing a nice welcoming party for all of us. That didn't mean I was going to be playing fair. Oh no, I would do everything in my power to make his defeat as humiliating and one-sided as possible. I was so eager for it, in fact, that I'd already written a bunch of messages to be sent to my own allies, and even a missive meant for the relative of a certain Altmer guest I was keeping under my hospitality. The companions were pretty happy with their haul as well, but they politely requested they also be let off as soon as possible. While they were quite satisfied with the dragonhide underarmor or just armor. In Ayla's case, I enchanted for them, they had to get back as their conflict with the Silver Hand was heating up, and they wanted to be on call if Kodlak ever wanted to strike back. I wouldn't have minded them staying as extra security for a while longer, but the warriors of Jorvaska were known troublemakers when bored. So I accepted their request and told them that they could call on the aid of me and mine when the time came. Most of it went over the heads of the Nord trio, but Durek understood exactly what I was talking about. The enthusiastic orc enjoyed his strength and power, but the constant bloodlust and aggressive instincts that went further than even his races did seemed to grate on him constantly. He would realize his mistake soon enough, and when he finally did, I would be there to nag him forever, after I liberated his soul, of course. And so it was that I found myself finally able to sit down after close to a full day, after I took up the bow and gained the blessing of Akatosh, the weekly crackling fire welcoming me into its warm embrace as I had my first cup of fresh coffee in days. Though, as usual, I was unable to simply sit still and turned my eyes toward the two silent vampires sitting close by. You two doing better now? Valerica was the first to respond, as Serana was currently too busy half-napping with her head in her mother's lap. Finding out that all the pain and betrayal we went through was the whim of an elven man-child is not something one simply gets over. She frowns deeply. But yes, we are doing better. Kicking the bastard in his still-burning groin was a form of catharsis I did not know I needed. You have my thanks for that. The smile she gives me would have no doubt scared a lesser Mer. Always happy to be of help. I smile and bow my head in jest before looking at the now-awake Serana. I hope the poor fucker's blood didn't give you indigestion. Serana pauses briefly. He did, in a sense. Oh? I quirk my eyebrow. The younger vampire gets up and stretches her arms with a content exhale before looking back at me with an amused expression. He tasted of only one thing. She pauses dramatically, pure despair. My mouth twists into a grin without any of my input. I did not think I fucked him over quite that badly. But you did. Serana smiles happily. Even if I did have to feel all of it after consuming a part of his power, I am still happy that the bastard died without even being able to will himself into fighting back. It was majestic. Her own grin twists into a perfect replica of her mother's. These two are fucking scary sometimes. I suppress a shudder. Good thing they are firmly on my side. Speaking of drinking the blood of vampires, Valerica speaks with the subtlety of a freight train. Could you? She trails off a bit uncomfortably. What, do the same thing I did for Serana? I ask, and she nods hesitantly. I could, but there are conditions. Naturally. The elder vampire nods, having expected no less. I want you to teach me, I say simply. Valerica narrows her eyes. Teach you what exactly? Everything. I smile hungrily. She hesitates, visibly holding back a scoff. Well, aren't you demanding? You are asking me to liberate your immortal soul from a multidimensional rapist. I deadpan, I dare say I am being incredibly fucking generous with you, considering your earlier disrespect. Oh ho ho, she looks ready to blow the fuck up and I can't wait to ramp up the price just to fuck with her. I almost giggle at her furious expression, but then Serana, bless her heart, places her hand on Valerica's shoulder and nearly digs her fingers into it as she turns to me with a wooden smile. She accepts. I do know. Valerica tries to protest, but is cut off as Serana presses harder, her smile growing a bit more strained. She accepts, happily, and turns to her mother, doesn't she? Her mother must have seen something in her eyes because she deflated near immediately and sighed, "Very well, I accept." "Most marvelous," I exclaim flamboyantly. "Kindly grasp the blade." I instruct as I summon blasphemy, the sword already blazing with power. She hesitates for a brief moment, but after some encouragement from her daughter, she does as instructed and audibly gasps as she feels the changes kick in. A moment later, she is out cold and being gently lowered by Serana. "Thanks for that," said Vampire smiles at me gratefully. She is too proud sometimes. Sometimes, I huff, and we both share a chuckle, enjoying the simple crackling of the fire as we turned silent. A minute or so later, I spoke again. "Are you prepared for what is to come?" Serana hesitates, her hands hovering above the fire as she reveled in the fact she could enjoy its warmth without repercussion. "I will be." She finally says in a somber tone, "It won't be easy, no matter how much you justify it to yourself." I tell her, "But at the end of the day, we both know that this will be the right thing to do. If Harkon falls and no one takes his position as the vampire lord of Skyrim, we will simply be replacing one monster for another as a foreign clan sends its minions forward." She remained silent for a long while after that, allowing her mind to wander as she absently stirred the fire with a burned stick. "You really think I should be the one?" she asks finally. "Yes." I nod, my voice certain. "You have lived in this new world for months now and have learned much of what it has to offer, while your mother is still obviously stuck in her ways." The next words I say come straight from the heart. "Besides the practicality of it, I have learned that for all the monstrous terror you are capable of causing, you are a good person, and I can firmly say that I'd trust no one else with the responsibility." "I see," she mutters, going back to her stick. I do not fail to see the glint of happiness in her eyes, however. A couple of hours later, just as I am about to drift off into a short nap, I sense the way shrine lighting up and see Shalazar step out of it with his 2 fellow archmages, soon followed by Karsus and a small horde of Dunmer and automatons. Dusting my hands off, I stand up and greet them with arms spread in welcome. "Masters, grandfather, be welcome to my new domain." "You really outdid yourself this time, Raven." Savos shakes his head as he looks at the valley spreading out below us with genuine wonder. Tolfdir too seems taken by the sight, "Truly marvelous," is all he says. "You haven't seen anything yet?" I clap my hands and invite them for a tour, the retelling of the expedition immediately enrapturing my curious audience. Weeks later, the assault on Castle Volkihar was almost prepared. There was only one card still left for me to play, however, and so I found myself sitting in my private booth at Seaghost's Respite, waiting for a certain guest I had invited. With almost perfect punctuality, my personal guards let someone into the room. A tall Altmer with a near-perfect face and dressed in the attire of a noble mage of Somerset entered, his bearing one of authority but failing to hide an undercurrent of worry. "Ah, Lord Narcissus," I greet the Altmer with false cheer, my happy smile slowly twisting into a predatory grin. "So nice of you to finally join us." Chapter 267, Lordly Negotiations. My jovial greeting takes Narcissus aback briefly, but he doesn't so much as twitch outwardly and simply nods his own greeting. "I am glad to have an opportunity to solve our disagreement peacefully, Lord Dagoth." "But of course." I smile and point my hand at an empty seat. "We are not barbarians." He hums non-committedly and sits down, his 2 guards standing a bit behind him. "As much as I would like to ruminate on your decision to live with these," he looks at a group of Nords being rambunctious at the other side to the inn and scoffs, "People, I do believe we have much to discuss." "Quite." I agree, and my fake joviality disappears as swiftly as it appeared. namely what you can offer me for the freedom of one Lady Neris and the subsequent wereguild for her crimes against my house. Crimes against your house? Narcissus sputters and calms just as swiftly. I assure you that whatever happened is just a terrible misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I frown. So are you telling me that the person currently held in my cells is not in fact your daughter, who under Thalmor orders attacked me and the Dawn Guard while accompanied by an entire warband of Volkihar vampires as we were working to liberate a moth priest from one of their associates? Before he can answer, I look to the fully armed Marin who was standing nearby. Seeing as she is obviously someone of no import, you can go and get right. She did what? The Altmer Lord blows up, standing up and smashing his hand on my table, my guards tensed up, leading to the Altmeri guards also doing so, but none moved seeing as I remained seated. Completely unmoved by the explosive reaction, I simply deadpan, "That table is ruby ash." He looks down and frowns. "Oh, 1,000 apologies," and sits down. I barely hold back a snort at that. "I trust, then, that you are unaware of her actions." "Unaware?" He scoffs. "I was told she was exploring the Direni Tower with her fellow students, not gallivanting to Skyrim of all places so she can play Justiciar." "So you are telling me that a daughter of a kinlord can simply waltz into Skyrim, join the local Thalmor, and do as she likes? I may be young, even by human standards, but even I can see how that does not indicate competent parenting." I drawl as he fumes. The regal elf takes a deep breath and visibly calms himself, taking the cup of wine one of my servants offered without even glancing at him and sipping in silence. He was either protected from poisons or put genuine respect in the noble discourse I invited him over for. And considering how much the Altmer valued magical power as a race, I would not be surprised in the least if he thought me above simply poisoning his ass. All the better for me for when I actually do need to use it. Finally done with his repose, he takes a breath and speaks. "I do believe we have strayed off topic. While I may wish to disbelieve your claim of my daughter's scandalous behavior, the simple fact that she is in Skyrim would only serve make me look the fool. So tell me, Lord Dagoth, what is it that you require for my daughter's safe return?" He pauses and raises a finger. "In fact, why don't you invite her here? I trust that such a thing would serve for a fine lesson." "Oh?" I raise an eyebrow. "Sure you won't just try to take her?" He scoffs. "There is no need to insult my intelligence, good sir. Even a child knows not to act out in an enchanter's domain." His guards slightly stiffen at that. I huff in amusement, "Fair," and wave for Marin. "Bring her in." As my guards leave, I turn back to my guest. "While we wait, could I interest you in the local specialty? My cooks are quite inventive, and they would be quite disappointed if I did not show off." His eyes light up with interest, but of course I would be delighted to. It was about 20 minutes later that Naris was brought in. Just in time to see her father enjoying a pleasant meal with me as we made rich people jokes about the Nords. I did not dislike the people. I even would go so far as to say I liked them, but that would not stop me from having some good old casual stereotyping fun. The young Altmer mage just stood there and stared at us for a full minute as we pretended she wasn't even there, much to our hidden amusement and even that of the guards. Just as she was about to speak out, her father suddenly dropped his smile and turned to her. "Ah, Neris, how odd it is that I would find you here in such pleasant company. Last I heard you were joining the expedition to Adamantia. I am certain that the Honourable Headmaster will have a perfect explanation as to why." He does take a moment to look her over, his shoulders relaxing ever so slightly as he notices no signs of torture or mistreatment. She pales and looks down. "Father, Save it." He raises his hand imperiously. "You have said and done enough, and once I am done paying for your foolish indiscretions, we will be having words, young lady, many words." She gulps audibly and sits down without a word. Now that I have been assured of her well-being, for which I am most grateful. He looks back to me. "What will her freedom and your forgiveness cost me?" I hum as I lightly pull on my goatee. "Well, she did aid the goals of Molag Bal." She winces and Narcissus glares at her, fight alongside the Volkihar, thereby resulting in the deaths of 5 honourable vampire hunters. They both show far less care about this detail, And lastly, but most importantly, she did assault my person with no less than 100 spells, varying from those of the adept level all the way up to master. Narcissus straightens up. If not for the situation, I would have been proud to hear that. A most respectable showing, certainly. I nod sagely. Naris looks down, but this time blushing all the way up to the ears. It was almost adorable. And while I would certainly accept monetary compensation, I continue, I could be persuaded to drastically lower my grievances, depending on your pull with the local Thalmor. He hums thoughtfully. I do find myself in possession of some contacts, yes. What do you have in mind? Good. My inner Palpatine preens at the fact. See, the current vampire problem we are having is unfortunately a threat of the worldly scale and the local leadership of your government. Pretentious peasants, the lot of them. Narcissus grumbles to himself. Filing that away for later, I go on, being as short-sighted as they are, have been supporting them all along, no doubt leading into unnecessary difficulties for us righteous souls. My request from you, Honourable Kinlord, is to have all support promptly withdrawn, and that you ensure as many of them do as much damage in the form of sabotage as they do so. And that is all. He blinks. I shrug. I am magnanimous in victory. A dry chuckle leaves his throat. I can definitely make sure the vampires suffer, but I cannot ensure that every single agent will do as I command. Naturally, I incline my head, though I am afraid I will need some assurance. He narrows his eyes. While you have been a gracious host, I assure you that any form of double cross will be paid back tenfold. No need to get defensive. I raise my hands placatingly. You can either pick your daughter up after the fact, or you can take her now while providing assurance. He frowns. What form of assurance? Instead of answering, I simply clap my hands, causing Mephis to materialize beside me. Seeing as she was observing the whole thing, she immediately gets to work and looks at Narcissus, no doubt sending a silent contract his way. The elven lord stares at her for a moment before turning back to me, genuine respect in his eyes. I see that your reputation is anything but undeserved. He looks back at the Daedra and nods. I accept. Marvelous. Mephis's silky voice caresses our ears. Getting up from my seat, I offer Narcissus my hand, which he shakes firmly. It was a pleasure meeting you, Kinlord. I do hope that our next meeting will be of a more pleasant nature, however. Indeed, Lord Dagoth? He nods with a cordial smile. Your chefs have my compliments. I am certain they will be delighted to hear that. I smile and watch as the Ultima leave, Naris giving me one last glance before following after her father. Well, Davos steps out from a nearby shadow. That was something, I guess. I light up a cigarette while rolling my eyes, pretentious fucking twat. I huff and take a puff. I think that he was a marvelous little specimen. Mephis voices amusedly. He was trying to plan around you the entire time, but the moment I appeared, he surrendered without a complaint. Yeah, I figured as much. I wave it off. Honestly, if he was being genuine the whole time, I'd have been offended. Oh, does my lady's chosen not enjoy genuine conversation anymore? Mephis asks teasingly. Per lease, I snort. He was an Ultima Kinlord, a full Duke of Somerset. I am surprised he did not commit suicide via sheer arrogance. Which is a very arrogant thing to say, don't you think? The annoying Daedra dares use logic. Yeah, whatever. I roll my eyes and walk out into the main section of the inn, where all of my friends and close ones were gathered. Now that that is done, I pause dramatically. Let's get this party started. Sea Ghost's respite turns from relatively silent into a party in the span of 10 seconds, as my servants bring out the food and drinks and the musicians start to sing and play their songs. Today was the day I entered my 3rd decade, and I was not about to skip the celebration just for some Ultima Ponce. The following day, I found myself in one of the underground practice ranges of my mansion, Auriel's bow glowing in my hands as I let loose arrow after arrow, my frown deepening with each shot. Last night's party was pleasant, but the shadow of what awaited us loomed over everyone, and most were unable to relax fully. This annoyed the crap out of me, but getting pissy about it would have been unreasonable, so I just grinned and bore it. The drinks made sure the night was enjoyable after a while anyway. What did make me incredibly pissy was what I was currently doing. Come on, boss, it isn't even that hard. Davos grouses from nearby. His target had long since been completely destroyed due to the sheer volume of crossbow bolts he stuffed it with. Fuck off. I always sucked with a bow. I loose another arrow and miss the target completely. I just don't understand how someone can be that bad. Davos chuckles, having far too much amusement at my expense. I stop what I was doing and breathe in slowly. I had been practicing archery for over a week now, and I haven't managed to get further than mere novice level, and I have officially had enough. Letting my magic loose, I drew the bow once again, the arrow suddenly being carved with numerous runes and glowing gold as I forced my power into the bow. Without even looking, I loosed the arrow and slammed all of my telekinetic might into it, sending what looked like a golden laser straight into the bullseye, destroying the target and sinking it fully into the cavern wall behind it. That good enough for you? I look at my right-hand mare with a grin. He gulps and raises his hands in surrender. Whatever you say, boss? Before our banter could continue, we were interrupted by Nightshade silently entering the range with an unfolded letter in her hands. She waited for no prompts as she announced, "Everyone that could be gathered has been. They are only waiting for us." I store the bow and grin. Good, I was getting sick of all the waiting. Harkon was officially on a countdown, and I couldn't wait to put his pathetic arse into the ground. I have more important shit to worry about than an uppity vampire with a god complex after all. Chapter 268, Fall of Volkihar, Part 1 Utter Prelude. As we stepped through the gates of the Solitude Common District, the loud hubbub of the ducks slammed into us like a wall of noise and smell, except if the place could usually be compared to a complete mess that somehow ended up working. Today it could quite easily be described as complete and utter chaos. Hundreds of sailors of different origins were moving supplies around and loading them onto a trio of large warships, sometimes barely avoiding each other as the crowded walkways were filled to the absolute brim. I was genuinely amazed by the fact no one ended up being trampled to death. Letting my sight loose, I quickly counted, went over the already boarded forces, and allowed a satisfied smile to form on my face. 1,000 legionaries, Rika's veterans who fought against both Potema and the Forsworn, and Tullius's own heavy elite from Cyrodiil. There were a couple dozens of my own people that I managed to free up from their duties in the valley so that no one could accuse me of duplicity. Not like I was relying on my rank and file to do much, truth be said. No, that dubious honor fell upon the shoulders of Gelibor and his paladins, as even while not fully recovered, the fools demanded to be allowed to join the assault with the zeal of, well, paladins. Letting my mind wander for a bit, I looked over the ships we were going to be using. 2 of them were built in the usual imperial style, following a mostly galley-like design, built for rapid maneuvering, yet still far larger than its medieval counterpart, as Tamriel had access to much better materials. The ships were armed with a steel-tipped ram and 6 hull-mounted scorpions each, the bolts of which looked like they were made to kill trolls and break other ships into scattered bits of wood from downright scary distances. It was the 3rd ship, however, that truly took the cake, as it were. The Jagged Crown, Torrig's personal battleship, and his father's before him. A massive thing looking like an unholy mix between a carrack and a Nordic longship that somehow ended up fitting together into the most imposing pile of wood I ever did lay my eyes on. The behemoth of a vessel was so large it could easily house an entire 500-man cohort, with lots of space left over for additional supplies. Its hull was covered on all sides by wooden walls, which looked like they would be a nightmare to attack, and as if that was not enough, the prow of the ship was dominated by a massive fuck-off ballista with what seemed to be enchanted bolts. Shoddy work, but I guess that not everyone knew how to mass-produce enchantments like a living machine. Reassured of my destination, I started walking toward the flagship, 2 hooded figures falling in behind me and my retainers. Torrig and the general were thoroughly informed of my plans and the presence of the Volkihar women, and while the duo were not incredibly enthusiastic about their presence, they were intelligent enough to understand my intentions and allowed my plans to proceed unimpeded. The whole situation did lead me to overhearing something about the local head of the East Empire Company getting pissy at the king because he did not wish to grant them the island after the fact for what was basically free, which amused me to no end. The castle was already slated to be given to Sorana through the creation of disgusting amounts of false paperwork that would somehow give her the right to it. And almost as a fuck you to the company, the Volkihar duo was already planning on creating a dock village which would serve them as a alternative food source. As we passed, people paused, either to gawk or salute, depending on their disposition, their reaction to my sudden presence creating something of an impromptu procession as we made our way to the meeting. The moment I stepped on board, one of the royal housecarls pointed me toward the back of the ship, a veritable bunker of both material and enchantment, so potent in fact that I would have to invest genuine effort to see within. We were let in without any fuss, and were greeted with the sight of a large table with nautical charts and a pilfered map of Castle Volkihar and its surroundings, said map being covered in numerous notes about magical defenses and traps, courtesy of Lady Valerica. One would not need to take long to understand the need for the over-engineered bunker of a room, for almost everyone of any note that could be called was present within. The Archmagi, accompanied by Phineas, were standing off to the side, with expressions ranging from bored to knowing, as they listened to the rest discuss their plans of assault. The king stood with his stewards and thanes, and was doing his best to pretend to not be bored half to death by what was no doubt the 15th time the plan was being reiterated. His bodyguard stood at full attention, not letting his charge out of sight for even the briefest of moments. Positioned near them were General Tullius, Legate Riker, and gaggle of his officers, which included the Dawnstar twins, the female half of whom immediately noticed me and gave me a cheerful wave. All of them were far more professional in their attempts to pretend at being interested in what was being talked about, but still managed to look bored out of their minds.
And finally, at the opposite corner of the faction of our endeavor, Imla and Alan representing the Dawn Guard, and Maran Alo and Gelibor representing House Dagoth, said number swiftly joined by Davos and Knight of the entire gathering on their shoulders and left me as quickly as they could without seemingly running.
I cleared my throat, causing most to turn their gaze at me. Ladies, gentlemen, your majesty. I offer a light bow and a smile. I trust that we are almost prepared. Ah, Raven. Torrig's eyes brighten with excitement. Finally let go of your library. 'Twas a most terrible burden to move my posterior, but alas, I am here. I deadpan, earning a couple of chuckles from the older mages. The High King chuckles and waves for me to approach the table. We will be ready to move out within the hour. Do you have any new insights to offer? That would depend entirely on the approach you decided on. I hum and give Tullius a pointed look. Catching my meaning, the middle-aged general nods and points at the part of the sea to the castle's south. The current plan is to approach the castle from the south, being that that side holds the most open ground, and disembark our forces via rowboats while providing covering fire with artillery and magic. After that is done, we will focus our fire on the most dangerous defenses, repositioning our ships so as to best support our troops. I cup my chin and let out a thoughtful hum. The artillery will be a boon to begin with. There is no doubt about that. However, we are fighting vampires here the moment they realize that they are unable to hold us back. With their horde of gargoyles or necromantic meat shields, they will withdraw deeper into the castle, which is no doubt protected by powerful enchantments. The general's jaw tightens. This was always going to be a bloody grind. We can only ensure that casualties are reduced as much as possible, even if I am certain that we will bury hundreds before the day is out. I share a quick glance with the college mages, getting a nod from Savos in response. Turning back to the general, I point at said mages who were now far more attentive. In that case, I recommend that each spearhead is headed by one of the masters. Their personal power will ensure that no vampire is able to heedlessly slaughter our men as they focus on taking down the chaff. Before Tullius can voice his surprise at mages risking their lives, Torrig interjects, "The Crown of Skyrim will forever remember the aid of the college." His voice was firm, and no one wished to question him on what was obviously a positive. Satisfied with that, I looked to Isran. "What will you and yours be doing?" The Red Guard steps up and points at the side entrance Sorana and I used in our infiltration. "My men and I will enter through the supply dock. Their defenses will no doubt be heightened, but I believe that we can use it to climb up into their thrall pens." He practically spits the words out, and at the very least ensure they have no fresh supply of blood to heal themselves with. The whole crowd lets out noises of agreement and support. Even Tullius seemed impressed by the idea, if not by the potential casualties it would cause. But I was not quite so reassured. The Dawn Guard will not be enough. I shake my head. You will take my own forces and these two ladies. I point to the still hooded Serana and Valerica. With you, that should be enough to hold back any counterattack long enough for us to relieve you. I can practically hear my officers groaning at yet another crawl through corpses, Alor looking especially uncomfortable with the fact, all of them save for Gelibor, who simply nods his acceptance of his duty with millennia of reinforced stoicism. Isran looks like he wants to grumble, but seeing as he had known me for longer than an hour, he simply accepts his fate and nods. Very well. I am tempted to release a sigh of relief at the fact no one decided to be difficult about this, not even the Thanes, even if Erica looked like wanted to propose something dumb just so he could feel important, decided to butt heads or let their pride get in the way of dealing with our enemies. It would seem that a potentially apocalyptic threat was enough to cow even the most prideful among us. Though I may have overstated the danger a teeny little bit, seeing as I could just hide the bow for a literal eternity with Harkon not being able to do shit. But I wanted to be done with this whole ordeal, and drowning his ass in the force of an entire kingdom would more than suffice. Just as I am about to conclude the outline of the plan with some minor addendums, Falk speaks up, his words directed at Torrig, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "And where will you be, my king?" Without the barest hint of forethought or hesitation, the young ruler of Skyrim foolishly declares, "At the front, leading the charge, obviously." Dead silence descends onto the room. A single second passes where only breathing is heard, and then the room explodes in noise. Tullius tries patiently explaining how that is a terrible idea. The Firebeards practically shake Torrig while competing with each other at who can make up the more expletives. Shalazar and Savos cackle like maniacs. Tolfdir sighs in nostalgia, and the Thanes looking quite done with life. And all this happens at the same time, and continues for a whole minute with even more people joining in on the bandwagon of exasperated terror. Finally, having enough of this, I clear my throat while enhancing the noise with illusion magic, startling most of those present into silence. Once everyone had calmed down, I spoke, "Are you done?" An uncomfortable moment passes before sheepish looks and awkward apologies are exchanged as everyone realizes what absolute idiots they were being. Well, everyone except the old mages who were still internally laughing their asses off, with the exception of Shalazar, naturally, as he was laughing out loud. Right. I draw out Torrig, you can't be on the front. Falk nods, almost in victory, as Torrig protests, if the king does not lead, how will his subjects follow? I sigh, we've been over this, Torrig. If you die like a complete idiot, far more people are going to suffer than merely those who you call family and friends. You can join the fight, but charging in head first into a deadly gauntlet of traps and Daedra-enhanced enemies is not acceptable. But he tries to protest again, and that was enough of that. You have a son. I cut him off mercilessly. He chokes on his words for a moment, letting his shoulders slump and nods in defeat, and in doing so, allowing us to finish up with the meeting. I am so holding this over his head once we get back, truly there was no better blackmail than telling his wife what he wanted to do. Things both slowed down and sped up after that. Sped up in the sense that it was not long before we were sailing onto the Sea of Ghosts and toward our destination, and slowed because we were sailing, and sailing was fucking boring. Still, the ship was moving slowly enough that I could crack out the painting equipment and do some practice as we traveled. Reaching our destination was going to take us a bit over half a day, leading to us arriving exactly at the dawn of the following day, as to make sure we held every possible advantage, so I would have quite a bit of time to kill. Almost as if the world itself was listening to me, it decided to hit me with a particularly frustrating form of and a fog slowly descended upon us after only 2 hours of sailing, turning my genuinely good attempt at a landscape into mess. I was tempted to summon Crine to clear the fog out of sheer petty vindictiveness, but I held back. This fog was obviously summoned, and Harkon was no doubt planning to use it in his defense. so removing it at a critical moment would probably allow us to surprise the blood-sucking twat. Seeing as my current attempt at relaxation was utterly ruined, I descended into the ship's hold and started churning out scrolls for my men. The Star of Azura was brimming with power after my excursion to the Forgotten Vale, and I always carried scroll-worthy parchment with me, so I had resources to burn. Yeah. Speaking of the Vale, I really should come up with a new name for the damned thing. Hours passed in that blissful monotony of creation, my hands blurring with practiced precision without even the briefest pause. And almost as if it were a mere blink that passed, dawn had arrived. I left the downright ungodly amount of scrolls for my men to pack up and ascended upstairs. The mist parted just as I walked out onto the deck, giving me a perfect view of Castle Volkihar in all its magnificent Gothic half-ruined glory. All around me, the soldiers were getting ready, and the engineers were already loading up the artillery pieces and doing final checks on the war machines. The elder mages were all discussing the wards they could observe and planning countermeasures, while the mortal leaders were staring ahead with determination. A mental ping drew my attention, and a moment later a savage grin wormed its way onto my face. I was already planning on ruining the fucker's day, but now I was going to make him wish he was never born. Chapter 269, Fall of Volkihar, Part 2, Assault. Quest issued, Slay Harkon Volkihar. Reward, the collected works on spirituality by Archmage Numeral of Aldmaris. The face-splitting and rather bloodthirsty grin refused to leave my face as I let my thoughts go wild at the potential uses of such knowledge. True, it did seem a bit random considering my focus on more temporal topics, but taking into account the fact that my very distant ancestors were a form of spirit definitely gave me some ideas. So distracted was I by the potential of the promised reward that I completely failed to notice Phineas approaching me and smacking my shoulder, almost losing his head in the process as I reflexively summoned blasphemy only to stop an inch from his illusory neck. Charming. He deadpans and starts dragging me toward the edge of the ship. I feel something approaching from below. It is filled to the brim with necromantic magicka. Smothering my irritation, I take a good look and blink. That is actually pretty damn ingenious. What is it? Phineas asks. A bunch of overcharged dead slaughterfish. I inform him dryly. They will be upon us in less than a minute. He groans. I might be able to deal with that, but the fog is not helping. You can leave that for me. I smile and leave him to his preparations, his grumbles about wise-ass mystics following me the whole way to the prow of the ship. The fog had grown thicker in the past few minutes. It was not magical, but would still be incredibly debilitating for those who could not see with their mind, which meant everyone but me and possibly Shalazar. Thankfully, I had come prepared. I focused my mind on my connection with my most powerful vassal and sent a simple command, clear the skies for me. With pleasure, rumbled Crine from atop a distant mountain, only for that rumble to be replaced by a crack of echoing noise. A moment later, Loch Varkur. The billowing fog stilled for but a moment, and then, as if the world itself disdained its presence, it was launched upwards and into the distance, forming a tiny cloud as it began its journey somewhere in the vague direction of Akavir. The grim and battle-ready warriors atop the deck stood surprised as their sight suddenly returned, and a cheer broke out across all three ships. Tullius seemed especially enthused by the development, and was no doubt already planning on enlisting my aid for a repeat performance on the warfront. The sudden onset of good cheer did not last long, for mere seconds later the seas below us darkened, and numerous thuds could be heard as the veritable mountain of reanimated fish attempted to chew through the hardened boards of the ship's hulls. Once that attempt failed, I felt a burst of power coming from one of the windows in the castle, and the fish surged upwards, forming a massive wave that enveloped the flagship from both sides, almost drowning out the sun in a sea of sharp-toothed corpses. Only for it to still completely as Phineas rose his hand, his deep understanding of necromancy allowing him to engage the caster in a mental battle for control. Unfortunately for the vampire, the moment of stillness proved quite fatal for his plan, as I shared a look with Savos, and both of us immediately flew from the deck atop our familiars, disintegration rays and sunfire bolts already mid-cast. I like to imagine that my sight did not allow me to see the elder vampire briefly wet himself before him. His room and half the tower it was in were blown to tiny chunks by our combined offensive. The staff of Magnus was truly an unfair tool when it came to blasting through wards. We were not given long to celebrate, however, as the numerous windows and walls that were facing our direction lit up like a Christmas tree, the hundreds of defenders stationed atop them all targeting us with arrows and spells. Dodging or blocking the attacks was insultingly easy, but they did manage to stop us from outright annihilating their defenses as Savos and I started to circle above the castle and deliver thrice the damage they attempted to send our way. Needless to say, when Shalazar finally decided to fly up, things stopped looking bad for the vampires and turned outright terrifying. General POV. Many of the less grizzled legionaries shuddered as what can only be called a storm of magic kept blasting over their heads, each spell feeling like it could annihilate an unprotected unit of soldiers in the blink of an eye. General Tullius was practically salivating at the idea of recruiting even one of them to the Legion. But his foolish fantasies were doomed to remain only that, and his attention was commandeered by the King of Skyrim. Makes you thank the gods they are on our sides, eh? The general suppressed a wince as another artillery turret was blown to smithereens by a flash of gold. Quite. He nodded stiffly and looked to the young king. Are you prepared? I was born ready. Torrig smiled cockily. Oh, the songs the bards will write of this day. Uh-huh. Tullius deadpanned and crisply called out, Rika. Your orders, General? The dutiful legate saluted. Ensure the king remains away from the front. He commanded and left the smiling legate and pouting monarch behind. He walked up to the prow of the ship just in time to hear the engineer Quester order the weapon team to fire. The massive ballista bolt ramming into one of the smaller towers of the castle and detonating in an explosion of fire, no doubt killing many of the defenders within, but failing to destroy the tower itself. Slowly, almost gently, the ships approached the shallow waters surrounding the castle. The deck covered in an eerie silence, completely contrasting the magical cacophony coming from above. Tullius turned to his legionaries, the infiltration team having left minutes ago, and unsheathed his weapon. Soldiers, begin the attack, for the Empire. A loud salute rose in response, and with the efficiency only ever held by the elite, the legionaries boarded the numerous boats hanging from the sides of the ship, many of whom were filled with dead slaughterfish after Phineas finished deanimating the damn things. The defenders did not simply wait and let the legion land, however, as the moment the first boat approached the coast, the many statues hanging from the castle and its bridge animated themselves and threw their carved bodies at the surprised soldiers. As if that was not enough, numerous holes opened up in the ground of the island, the vampiric creations within billowing outside in a horde of deathhounds and massive bats. It looked as if the wave was going to crash into the vastly outnumbered legionaries before the rest could disembark, no doubt slaughtering them to the last man without even allowing them to fight back. The Lich and Archmage had other ideas, however, as Phineas and Tolfdir appeared in front of the soldiers in a flash of noise, and as fast as a blink, the entire battlefield was covered in earthen spikes. Those who failed to get themselves impaled soon found their tiny wills being subverted as a true master of necromancy made his presence known. The intervention of the Magi allowed the Legion to land and begin their march toward the gates, only suffering slight damage from the defenders as anyone who dared target them soon found themselves turned into fine ash, courtesy of the trio of flying madmen. Whoever was commanding the defense had no desire to allow them to approach lightly, as the gargoyles which were felled during the fight kept reanimating and crashing into the attackers' formation, both doing damage to morale and outright killing a few dozen men and women through sheer unpredictability. As they approached the massive bridge leading within, the leading legate ordered his men to stop as the gates opened up, letting loose a much greater enemy than before. A pair of massive Nords led the vampiric charge as hundreds of thralls were thrown down the bridge in an attempt to distract the attackers long enough for the vampires to vault over them and begin their gleeful slaughter of the mortals. Many such attacks succeeded, Tolfdir being forced to focus on only one enemy as the lead vampire engaged him in a contest of strength, and somehow managed to hold on even as the elder Archmage empowered himself with dragon skin. Phineas was having other issues, as while he could take control of vampires, with enough effort they were still creatures with a will and could resist such attempts unless dominated by way of ritual, and his skills at destruction were subpar by battle mage standards. It was thus that the Lich found himself forced into using the dead legionaries to strike the vampires in the chaos of battle, reaping a great number of undead, even as he was repeatedly targeted by assassins attempting to kill him by sneaking up to him and stabbing him in the heart. Their expressions of disbelief when their knives passed straight through his glamour were truly cackle-worthy, and cackle he did, just before he sucked out their life force and turned them to ash moments later. More and more thralls kept pouring out of the gates, even as the ship-mounted artillery was now focused fully on slaughtering them in droves. And so, as many of them feared, the battle turned into a grind. Serana and Valerica tensed as they approached the supply dock, their many memories of their home forcing them into a state of melancholy even at this moment. Ever uncaring for the weakness of others, Isran spoke, "Prepare yourselves. Who knows which horrors wait within?" Davos waved him off. "Can't be worse than a Namiran pit." Alor and Nystade immediately face-palmed. The gathered Dawn Guards and warriors of Dagoth relaxed slightly at the display, but a quick glare from Isran reminded them all that tension is something they would need in but a moment. Slowly their boats rose from the water and firmly landed upon the sands of the beach, the entire force disembarking as quickly as they could, their weapons at the ready for the expected ambush. Only for said ambush to never come as they ascended the small defensive wall protecting the side entrance. Their apprehension grew as they kept going deeper and deeper into the castle, the numerous thrall corpses and piles of vampiric ash making even Isran uneasy. Could it be that the forces of darkness fought amongst themselves? One of the paladins of Ariel asked in a whispered archaic form of Tamrielic. Gelibor placed a hand on his shoulder to quieten him. "Patience, brother." The paladin nodded solemnly and followed after the rest. Soon the group reached the pile of remains sitting below the thrall pens, a hanged and impaled vampire quietly whimpering as his precious blood flowed freely onto the floor below. A slightly glowing parchment, pristine even in the filth surrounding it, was held within his hands, which he seemed to grasp as tightly as his shaking hands would allow. Realizing what may be going on, Davos quickly walked up to the vampire and grabbed the parchment, unslinging his crossbow and shooting the victim without even looking at him and freeing him from this mortal coil by way of rapid incineration. The parchment, as ostentatious as it was, held but a simple sentence. "The oath is thus fulfilled, Kinlord Narcissus." Davos read aloud, earning himself some dubious looks from the Dawn Guard. "What is this?" Isran asked. "We'll explain after. Give me a moment." Davos raised a hand to silence him and sent a quick prayer to Mephala, hoping to get some confirmation. A breath blew onto his ear, followed by an approving hum, and then an amused giggle as he shivered with discomfort. Completely refusing to explain what just happened, and firmly ignoring Nystade's glare, Davos looked up and muttered, "Crawling through blood and shit it is." A group of the House Dagoth Mer-at-Arms groaned as they brought out grappling hooks. Minutes later, the last of the infiltrators was dragged up by a frowning Valerica, who was growing more impatient with each passing moment. A quiet head count was made, and without any preamble, Isran smashed through the rotten door hiding them and charged out into the thrall pen. The vampire guard barely had the time to turn around as his head was turned to mush by the furious Dawn Guard, said fury spreading among the troops as they beheld with absolute horror the insult to the very gods they were welcomed with. Hundreds of dead thralls hung upside down as their blood was drawn into buckets and prepared for rapid consumption. Isran did not need to motivate anyone into a near berserk rage as a group of vampires descended into the pens with empty buckets in their hands and cruel glee in their eyes. The over 100 eyes filled with frothing rage they were welcomed by struck even the undead with a deep primal fear as a wave of crossbow bolts and solar magic removed them from Nirn and sent them screaming to their disgusting master. Soon the entire lower section of the castle was filled with the sounds of battle and a truly cosmopolitan mix of battle cries, the attackers almost competing with each other in how brutally efficient they could be in slaughtering their hated foe. A pair of crimson eyes followed the unfolding battle as their owner observed the two vampires with interest. He would have to make a decision, and soon. An hour after the assault began, things had turned deathly quiet. Castle Volkihar looked like a burned rock as smoke rose from every possible spot on its surface, and any vampire who had anything resembling a brain had long since descended into the relative safety of its halls. A loud crack resounded as the enlarged Tolfdir finally managed to get in a good smack against the vampire lord fighting him, sending him sprawling back and opening him up to the other mages. Orthiolf barely had the time to lean upwards before he was completely covered in 3 different forms of fire and a scorpion bolt just for good measure. Raven's POV. Tough motherfucker, that one. I grouse as I walk up the bridge and purposefully step on the ashes of one of Volkihar's dogs, the other archmages following me close behind. Say what you will about the Volkihar, but they are an ancient clan. Savos quips merrily, though I could see him hiding the sadness at the deaths of well over 200 legionaries we failed to stop. Not for much longer, though. I quip back and turn to Tolfdir. Master, would you do the honors? Tolfdir smiles, still in his enlarged state, and I feel magic flowing into his body as he pulls his hand back and slams it into the armored gate of the castle. To our great surprise, the damned thing holds, and even after repeating the attempt thrice with more and more magic, Tolfdir fails to destroy the gate. Well, the now shrinking Nord scoffs, that is annoying. Savos looks just about ready to try himself, but Shalazar stops him and looks at me. I am afraid that nothing short of some choice words will allow us within, my student. Was hoping to save some energy for later. I sigh and take a deep breath. My helmet shimmers with power as the deeper understanding of Force Krine forced Hey me to internalize flows into my words, Fus Roda. The shout strikes the gate and shatters it open, my voice, far more precise and directed than ever before, carrying well into the bloody halls within. I could almost smell their fear. Lok var Kor means sky, spring, summer. Chapter 270, Fall of Volkihar, Part 3 ta. The Storming. As the gates were slammed into the crumbling wall behind them, we rushed in heedless of the cloud of dust that blocked our sight, whichever unit of thralls unfortunate enough to be stationed just beyond finding themselves nearly glued to the floor, and then, as if that was not cruel enough to the poor mind-raped fuckers, they were ran over by a bunch of heavily armored legionaries. Needless to say, not a one survived that. The interior of the castle was a sprawling maze of halls and passages, a fact that would no doubt have led to numerous deaths on our side had we not been informed of it earlier. Instead, we only had to face an ambush every minute as opposed to the projected 20 seconds. Morale was constantly flagging with every attack, as even the brave legionary elites were swiftly worn down. They managed to continue only by virtue of the mountain of potions that was prepared beforehand. Moving through the bloodied halls was a complete slog. Harkon was holding nothing back, and we found ourselves facing hundreds of freshly turned vampires. True, poor fuckers were neither skilled nor particularly powerful, but they were much stronger than the average mortal, and some of them even transformed themselves into the form of a vampire lord, something that took even me a bit of time to put down, just enough for a few of the legionaries to fall every time I was distracted. A fact I almost felt was orchestrated specifically to mock me. And so it went. Room by room we kept marching on, leaving the dead and broken behind us for the healers to try and salvage. As I saw yet another elite legionary get her neck snapped by what could barely be called a young man, I was struck with the stark realization that if we mages were not leading the way, the battle may have potentially been a loss. The sounds of battle grew louder as we approached Harkon's throne room, and as we bashed through a line of armored vampires, high of their minds on fresh blood. Meeting the other squads in the process, we came upon a scene of panic. Many of the vampires who previously retreated after taking some serious damage were currently trying, and failing, to push into what I guessed were their feeding grounds. They were naturally stopped in their tracks by a veritable barrage of crossbow bolts and sun magic as the infiltration squad burst from the passage, with Isran and the paladins leading the charge in a literal blaze of golden glory, outright burning the weaker vampires around them to ash. I could see the ones in the back realize that they would be getting no blood the easy way, and that combined with the fact that they were only recently turned soon led to them going feral and quite literally throwing themselves at the closest source of non-vampiric blood. And who were we to deny the gift their disorderly formation presented? As one, the elite legionaries brought up their javelins and hurled into the mass of dead flesh, impaling them into each other and even sticking some of them into the floor. To my great chagrin, I could even see Torrig, who had no doubt sneaked his way to the front, now throwing axes with an expression of righteous fury on his face. Rikke and Bolgir ran up behind him, and seeing as no one would be able to drag him back, they accepted their fate and simply stood close to him, ready to shield him from any danger. The rest of us kept busy as well. Phineas began stoking the vampire's rage with his own influence, many of the untrained new bloods turning so furious they even attempted to feed on their own, leading to what I can only call a very permanent case of indigestion. Watching a young woman spewing her guts out as they turned to ash was certainly not a memory I would like to keep. Savos and Shalazar kept their position and promptly ceased the existence of any vampire with the sheer audacity to be stronger than acceptable. Tolfdir, bless his gentle heart, simply threw himself into the mass of flesh and did a most respectable impression of a meat grinder, showering both friend and foe in ash as his massive clawed hands lashed out with wild precision. I, however, had taken a much more interesting duty for myself. A powerful vampire, one of the big names in the castle, had the temerity to point his blood magic at a large group of legionaries, shredding a good number of them in a spiral of blood projectiles. He managed to block my first bolt of fire and lightning with a blood ward. He was forced back with the following dozen. He was so resilient, in fact, that I was forced to follow him as the moment I turned away, he would attempt to cause massive casualties with his bullshit. Soon I found myself in an empty corridor that led up to the Chapel of Baal. The blondie Altma tried goading me by mocking me for falling for such simple bait, or equally idiot statements such as so much for the great court mage, and grandstanding about the glory of Vingalmo. He was about to question why Harkon considered me such a threat, but I had had enough of his self-important posturing and sent out a mental command, causing the entire staircase to rain ash as my shade slaughtered his vampiric progeny. I could at that moment confirm that even monsters such as he still had a heart as he stared at the neat silvery ashes with genuine sorrow in his eyes, bloody tears flowing from his eyes as he shook at the sight. Unfortunately for him, unrepentant bloodsuckers such as he are not considered people in my mind, so instead of letting him grieve for even a moment, I had Scorch descend from above him and immolate him. Nice and crispy. Quite. I note dryly and turn around. Are you two prepared? Valerica, still not completely used to my utter disdain for making sense, flinched at being found out, but Serana merely smiled, a determined expression on her face. Yes. We ascended the stairs, the sounds of battle still echoing behind us as our allies rounded up the remaining vampires and put them to the sword. But then, just out of the corner of my sight, I noticed a swirling shadow hidden in a pitch-black alcove near the grand gate of the chapel. Incoming, I call out and prepare a spell. But it would seem that combat would be delayed as a regal Dunmer with bronze hair exits the shadows with his hands raised. It would seem my agents did not overstate your power. He addresses me, Garan Marethi. It is a genuine honor to meet the restorer of the tribe unmourned. He bows deeply. I hum non-committally, we shall see if you still feel honored by the end of this. At your leisure, my lord. He smiles, completely unshaken, and turns to the vampires. My ladies, allow me to welcome you back to the castle. Know that the place has been awfully empty with your absence. What are you doing, Garan? Valerica narrows her eyes, merely welcoming the ladies of the castle back to their domain. He smiles lightly. That smile disappears once both of the daughters of Cold Harbor show just how little they value bullshit at this moment, or if you prefer my bluntness. Garen's mouth twitches. Me and several others have found ourselves. He hums, disillusioned by Lord Harkon's recent obsession and the unfortunate results that brought. So you may say we are currently hedging our bets. So you are just waiting to see who will win? I deadpan, unimpressed. Just so. Garan nods. Even if we wish to aid you in taking him down, Lord Harkon's grip on us is too strong to resist if he is present, so we are forced to content ourselves with merely not aiding him. A bit cowardly. My mouth twists in disdain, but I sense no lies from him. I don't like this, Valerica practically growls. He served Harkon for thousands of years, trusting him is idiocy. And I understand your position, my lady, Garen interjects, sounding genuinely ashamed, but I feel I must remind you that had I not served him, I would not be standing here right now. This does serve to mollify the vampire matriarch somewhat. His next words, however, annoy her and amuse me to no end. And I must also remind you that that decision lay solely with the next Lady Volkihar, and I am quite certain that particular honor belongs to Lady Serana. Valerica actually growls at him this time, but before she can respond, her daughter places a hand on her shoulder. He helped me when I first returned here. He can be trusted. That just makes him more untrustworthy, Valerica hisses. Having had enough of this, I loudly clap my hands. In case none of you remembers, we are here for a reason, so Garen. I look to the Dunmer. Go away for now, and we will discuss this later. He smiles and backs away as I turn to the mother and daughter duo. How about we throw accusations after we know we aren't all about to die horrible deaths? A most wise precaution, Lord Dagoth. Garen bows once more. Valerica glares at him a bit longer, but finally scoffs and hisses, Fine. On your head be the consequences. Serana merely steps by the still bowing vampire without a word and approaches the gate, her hands twitching with nerves as she grabs the warded lock and shatters it to pieces. Good luck, Garen says and disappears. The unlocked gate opens with the slightest push of Serana's hand and leads us into the darkness of Molag's chapel, the presence of the Lord of Domination making itself known immediately. Harkon, who was standing before the bloody altar of his master, turns just as the last of us enters. He smirks knowingly as the gates slam behind us. My dear traitorous wife and daughter, how nice of you to finally join me. He greets them with open arms, his sarcasm palpable to all. Harkon, Valerica greets through gritted teeth. Serana remains silent. Come here to kill me, have you? The lord of the castle asks with a measure of amusement. To think you would bring down the mortals onto your own family, such treachery. A sardonic laugh leaves him at this, unsurprising, considering the company you keep. His eyes snap to mine, the pathetic attempt at control following it, doing absolutely nothing. His mouth twists into a restrained snarl. The upstart mortal servant of the spider whore, he who dares think he may deny me my purpose. My lord promised great rewards should I take your soul in his name. So said the puppet hanging on strings. I snark with an eye roll. Your insolence will not save you. He snaps, you have come here to die and brought me all that I need, but it doesn't have to be that way. He finishes slowly, his tone lush with temptation. I suppress a retch. Are you actually serious right now? I deadpan. He extends his hand, the mental intrusion bouncing off my mind once again. Give me Auriel's bow, I know you have it. He preempts, and I will permit you to stand by my side in the new world I shall build. I stand there, genuinely stunned by this. My disbelief was so potent, in fact, that Serana spoke before I could rip this idiot a new one. Are you truly so self-assured? His daughter asks in a deadpan tone, or merely mentally damaged. Cease your prattling, child. Harkon growls, waving her off as if her words did not matter whatsoever. No. She responds with no hesitation. We have invaded your castle, butchered your forces, and destroyed your entire base of power. What gives you the idea that you can do anything but grovel and beg for a quick death, you piece of redundant shit? The ancient vampire actually flinches at her words, more in surprise than anything, to think it would be now that you found a spine. Oh yes, Serana snips sarcastically. Who would imagine that keeping your own daughter in a nice pen her entire life might lead to a lack of character? Before he can answer, she turns to me. Raven, let us kill this bastard. No need to tell me twice. I grin and summon Auriel's bow, an enchanted sun-hallowed arrow already half drawn as I point it at Harkon. The altar before him pulses with power, slightly staggering me and making me miss his head and only demolish a part of the wall with the golden laser I shot. Harkon turns around, already transforming into his vampire lord form, a blood-red scale male covering him as his wings extend from their usual rotten stumps and form into full limbs, courtesy of Molag's direct intervention. Serana and Valerica follow suit, their power bubbling to the surface as the true progenitors of Volkihar assume similar forms. A blood-red blade appears in Harkon's hand as he glares at me. "Very well then, if you will not serve, then you will die," and he flings himself at me faster than I can blink.